Behold the lens. You know, it's easy to take this little tube of expensive glass for granted, but a lens does a lot more than just focus light onto a film stock. A lens's focal length has a great effect on the look and the composition of the shot, and the effects offered by a particular lens can be used by the filmmaker to shape our experience of the subject or situation on screen. Focal length just means the distance between the optical center of the lens and the film plane where the image is focused onto the film. Right now we're shooting with a 16mm camera using a lens with a 25mm focal length, which is in the middle of the road normal zone that approximates the way our own lenses, otherwise known as eyeballs, see and experience the world in terms of
depth of field,
movement, and perspective.
Right. So let's start with perspective. Perspective simply means the way objects appear in relation to one another in depth. Corey back there and Max in the middle are farther away and are thus smaller than Shelley, who's just a few feet from the camera. How about some coffee, Shelley?
Thanks.
Anyway, you have a pretty good idea how far they are from each other because of your intuitive understanding of relative size. We know that Max is about 30 feet behind Shelley, and Corey is another 100 feet back because of how big Shelley is in comparison with them. But we can mess with perspective just by changing the focal length of the lens. We'll throw in a 9mm lens, which has a much shorter focal length than the 25mm we were just looking at. With a short lens, otherwise known as a wide-angle lens, depth is stretched. That's because short focal length exaggerates the effects of
Perspective!
Right. Teeny tiny fuzzy Corey back there looks much farther away than he actually is, and the perceived distance between all three subjects appears much greater than it actually is. But if we switch to a telephoto lens with a long focal length, like this 120mm, Corey, Max, and Shelley all look much closer together now. Why? Because their relative size and frame is pretty similar. Long lenses compress depth, negating the effects of
Perspective! Hey! What about depth of field?
Well, depth of field refers to the depth, or space, in front of the camera, and what portion of it is in focus. You'll notice that Corey way back there and Shelley up front are both out of focus. That's because a long lens has a much narrower depth of field, and right now Max is the one occupying that little slice of focus. Of course, by adjusting our focus ring, we can move that slice of focus wherever we want it. Well, you'll have to wait because it's time to demonstrate how focal length affects movement through depth. But first we'll have to change back to a medium-length lens that approximates human vision. This shorter lens has not only greater depth of field, but delivers a pretty normal view of movement through depth. As our stars cross the bridge, they get closer and thus larger at a rate which matches our expectation of how the perspective of a walking subject should shift as it approaches us.
Where's the cooler?
Here, the space stretching effect of this short lens makes the bridge seem much longer. So, as they approach, the exaggerated depth effect makes it seem like they're covering more space than they actually are, which increases the apparent speed of their movement, which gets even more exaggerated when they get right up close. On the other hand, throw in a long or telephoto lens that flattens the appearance of depth, and shoot the same subjects, walking the same distance, and their movement through depth seems slower, because their size changes very gradually, negating our expectation of movement and perspective. In other words, we can see they're walking, but it doesn't look like they're covering much ground. And that is focal length in a nutshell. Cut!
Andrew, we're going to be shooting the
I talked to them, then I say, foreground, how much, I mean, is it carrying in a sort of a decent way? You can tell two people are back there.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Let's not rack this second time. We're just
The first bit when they do that. Now Tilly had a good question when she says you say depth of field, and then and Max says movement and perspective. When they say their lines, you want Shelley to look back at them saying their lines.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then you do the same thing when he says perspective, right? Then both of you guys are looking back.
Yeah.
But you got to be really careful, and you got to play like
Just
iron neck kind of thing, you know, and without looking. That sounds great. Robotic. Okay, that was good. Don't look at the light.